Very few, but very select indeed. It's my pleasure and honour really to introduce Claire Haynes, who is the chaplain of Christchurch College. And, she's got a very interesting talk prepared because I know some of the things she's going to say. How long have you been there, Claire?
This is my 3rd year, so 2 years, just over.
Yeah. So you're all stuck in now.
Is this?
So I think I'll just leave it there. You'll also have an explanation of this amazing picture. It really is amazing.
Thank you. Is this picking me up? Can you hear me? Great. Thank you. So my title at Christchurch is Chaplain and Welfare Coordinator. So I look after, I oversee the welfare for the students at Christchurch, as well as being the college chaplain. As I go through my talk, Christchurch is a bit of a quirky place. I'm sure you all know a little bit about it, but some things will be relevant to all college chapels. Other things are very particular to Christchurch because of the kind of place it is. But I'll tell you a bit about myself, if you're interested. I've been here for just over 2 years. Before that, I was a curate up in the benefice of Blenheim in Woodstock and Blaydon, and trained at Cuddesdon, Ripon College Cuddesdon. Before that, originally I trained as a social worker and worked in London with young homeless people and then with people with drug and alcohol addictions. And then we have 3 young boys, and I then helped run an entertainment agency with my husband, who's a magician. So a slightly kind of quirky route into Christchurch, but actually I feel that the background as an event organiser, a social worker, especially with drug and alcohol problems, and training to be a priest, sort of blends somehow in this quirky role that I have now as chaplain and welfare coordinator at Christchurch. So community is your theme, and if I had to say one of the strands of my life, we have a sort of golden thread that goes through life. We could go back and think, what is it that has always been important to us since the beginning? That might be hospitality and baking. It could be cars. There's something that we've always loved and found really integral to who we are. And for me, that would be community, actually, forming communities. I've always found that to be something that I'm naturally, by nature, drawn to. I've always loved, when I was a child, I always liked bringing different people together and having parties. So I enjoyed it naturally, but also having come to faith, when I came to faith in my 20s, I then pretty much immediately went and spent some time with a community in Rome called the Sant'Egidio community. And what I found there was a group of people who lived their lives with those on the edges, the marginalised and the poor around Rome. And I spent some time with them and developed a similar community in London. So forming communities, bringing people together, and forming prayerful communities that will then make an impact on the world and those around us has always been something that's I found really important. I'll come back to this picture in a minute, but Jean Varnier, I know you've had a talk about L'Arche, or you have one coming. Have you had? Yeah. Jean Varnier is one of the people that have inspired me through life, and Jean Varnier's wonderful book on community and growth has been really inspiring. And he talks about community as a place of belonging a place where people are earthed and find their identity. And so our first communities are generally our families, our place where we grow up and a place where we find who we are and ourselves. And I'm now in this place in a college where generally I'm working with young people who are leaving one community and going into the world and going and trying to find where they fit. And so how to develop an ethos of community in that place where they're in transition from one place of belonging to another. And Jean Vanier says, communities are truly communities when they're open to others, when they remain vulnerable and humble, when the members are growing in love, in compassion and humility. Communities cease to be such when members close in on themselves. So there's something about forming communities that aren't just about looking inwards and to each other, but communities where we're actually open and vulnerable and humble and growing in love, compassion and humility. That's something integral to what it is to be a Christian community. And it sounds really obvious, but communities are people. You know, the communities are people. And Bonhoeffer, the other great person to read if you're interested in communities, Bonhoeffer's Life Together is a fantastic book. He says, "He who loves community destroys community. He who loves the brethren builds community." If we're focused on our idea of what a community is, then we lose sight of the people. So to go back to college life and the community of a place like Christchurch, we have within the college, in a place like Christchurch, many different, I've done a little diagram. You have within a community like Christchurch and many of the other colleges, all sorts of different communities that make up the one. So Christchurch is quirky in that we have a cathedral. I've put that. I haven't spent hours thinking exactly where things go and the sizes, so please take this with a pinch of salt. So the cathedral forms a real heart there within Christchurch, but within the cathedral we have staff that would be attached to the cathedral. We'd have tourists, people who will come in and go out. They're not really part of the community, but they experience something of the community as they come in and as they leave. We have families. There are quite a number of families. My family live at Christchurch. We have a house there, and we're sort of on the edge, so our exit goes onto the street, Blue Boar Street. But the Cannons live there, several of the gardeners live there, people from the work. So there are quite a number of families who live there all year round. So when all the students have gone, there's quite a lot of us who are still around. The students make up a big proportion of the community of Christchurch. We have, the numbers aren't accurate, around 450 undergraduates, a couple of hundred graduates, and then various other students who will come in and go out. And then we have the tutors and the lecturers and the junior research fellows. So there are various, and then more staff to do with the college. So as I say, there's various different communities within the whole. So how does one create an ethos and community within this slightly, kind of different blobs. And in some ways it will never be. We will all be singing from exactly the same hymn sheet and feel all part of the same community. But there is something that all those who would be formed part of that would hold in common and hold dear. But there are also areas within that where there are a fewer crossovers that my role as chaplain has the potential to try and bring some of those together and try and form community where they could be very separate. The students and the staff, for example, could be very separate, but there are ways of actually forming connections between them. The cathedral and the college could be very separate, but there are ways of actually bringing those together. So some of that is within that. I think when I was thinking about this talk, it made me look back on what we understand, the different types of community. And I found that there are sort of 5 different, sort of generally 5 different types of communities. So communities of interest, where people who share the same interest and passion will come together. Communities of action, where people try and bring about change together, so you get together in order to help the food bank, or you get together to do something specific. A community of place, brought together by geographical boundaries. Community of practice, people in the same profession or undertake the same activity. And community of circumstance, communities of people brought together by external events and situations. Now, when I read through all these, I recognised all of them in Christchurch and in probably most colleges. That we're brought, the students are all there together because they have some academic excellence and they want to be studying, so they have that interest. Action to bring about change. There are things that we do that I'll talk about that we can do as a community to make an impact on the world around us. Place, obviously in a geographical location. Practice, the same profession. We have those communities of staff and tutors. And circumstance, they happen to be living in the same corridor as one another or in the same area. So we have all of this, but how can we form something that's not just an accident of we all just happen to be somewhere called Christchurch, living there? Is there something that's more important and integral to what we are? When thinking of that, I went back to our foundation, and I think with a lot of the colleges, it's quite important to remember where we've come from when thinking about the community that we are. It's just a picture of, it's not even Christchurch, is it? It can't be, because what's that bridge? Sorry, that's not a very good one. I looked it up, and I did it quite quickly, and now I looked at it again. Where is that? Yes, it may be. It gives an image of an old foundation. Yeah. Unless the Meadows used to be a massive river with a bridge over it, it's not Christchurch. But the foundations of Christchurch were formed from a prayerful community. So we had Frieswide, the community, the monastic community that came from the convent there, and then the Augustinians who prayed in this place for hundreds of years. And then after them, obviously we've had Wolsey and the foundation of Christchurch, which is Christ's church, and Aedus Christi, which literally means the house of Christ. So I think of it as being important to recognise when thinking about community in a place like Christchurch is how are we to be the house of Christ in a modern world where people are coming from all sorts of different parts of the world with different faiths, with no faith. Can we be still the house of Christ for all those different people, all those different people that would come in contact with us? I think we can, which is a good job. Otherwise, I'd probably leave. The danger, going back to Jean Varnier's quote about communities are truly communities when they're open to others, when they remain vulnerable and humble, to a place like, I'm going to go off to this, like Christchurch, is that if you thought of Christchurch, humility, vulnerability, probably wouldn't be the words that might come to mind, would they? Christchurch is very wealthy, we all know that. Christchurch has huge, grand buildings. And all colleges have a danger that they could be incredibly inward-looking. The aim would be to, for the college side, to produce students who have the best grades and go out and do the best that they can, and wouldn't it be great if we were at the top of the Norrington table and all of that. So we could be very focused inwards, in on ourselves, and there is within a college community an inherent competitiveness. You want to do your best, you want to get the right grades. And so vulnerability and humility and compassion aren't a given. They're not necessarily part of the community, and we can run the danger of being very self-absorbed, and a lot of the colleges can. And I think Christchurch, perhaps in particular, we have a lot of what we need already. Christchurch used to have pretty much everything. It used to even have its own fire station. So there was that sense that we didn't really need the rest of the world. We could have our food provided, our own police, our own everything, and even own fire station. So it can be communities that can be very inclusive and not exclusive and not inclusive. So, as chaplain and as a Christian within this place, and with my remit as a chaplain for the whole community, when I began, I was thinking of how can we find ways to bring people together from the different communities. How can those people within each community, for example the students, how can we form closer connections? How can those people become more compassionate, loving, love one another more? How can we do that? So there were various different ways that I sought to do that, but all stemming from the why would we want to do that, and that foundation of being the house of Christ, and the belief that I have that it's a better way to live, that actually if we live in community, we are less isolated and lonely, we can support each other and help each other, and it is generally a better way to live within our world. My role is generally in our little blob with the students and the tutors. So I'm the chaplain for the students, the staff, the SCR, so the tutors. So that would be in total about 1,000 people in my little parish. within that, and then crossing over with the cathedral. So for the students, thinking of this particular group, they're people, as I said, who have left one community of their home, and they're forming another. They're trying to work out where they fit in the world, what kind of people they're going to be, how they're going to then live. And some of the pressures that I see that young people face, they have huge academic pressures. Much of that's put on themselves. Some of that is put on them by families. Some of it is absolutely necessary. We often need pressure in order to do well. Sometimes it can be really overwhelming. We have a lot of young people who can feel very isolated and alone within a community like Christchurch. People think that they're going to have the best time of their lives at university, and often it isn't the case. You know, often they can be. I see a lot of people who say, this is what I've been working for years and years, and then they get to what they're working for, and life isn't quite as good as they were hoping. They're lonely, they haven't managed to make friends, their work isn't quite as exciting as they thought it would be. There's all sorts of reasons why people actually feel really quite isolated and lonely, even if they're in the midst of lots of people. And somewhere like Christchurch has actually very few places where people can mix across the different groups. Dining, for example. Dining, it's a bit blurry, it's not a great picture, it's not the thing. Dining is one of anyone who's ever been to college, it's the sort of heart of a lot of the colleges, is eating together. So it goes back to that monastic foundations of the big tables and we all eat together. And so community building over meals is one of the key core ways that we can foster community. However, in a place like Christchurch, and I'm sure many colleges, we have this strata dining. So the students would eat in one place, the senior members would eat in another place, and the staff would eat in another place. And very few times they mix. And then, of course, even in the main hall in the evening, the senior members would be at the top table and the junior members down below. We're quite divided in our dining. Now, one of the ways that I can build community around dining is that once a term we have house communion, corporate communion. Ours used to be called corporate communion altogether, and then we eat all together. But students told me that they saw corporate communion and thought it was for rich people trying to find God. So we changed the name because they were like, corporate, what's this? This isn't for us. So we changed the name to house communion. And so that is 3 times a year, pretty much the only time, actually I think the only time, that staff and students and senior members eat together. We have a service in the cathedral and then we eat together. And it's really special because of that, because it gives us that unity of being together and being of one body. And that happens 3 times a year. But there are very few other ways of actually getting together around a table with the different community structures within college. And another thing that, this is, before I move on, as I was saying, that the different communities within a place like Christchurch, this is the choir. So a lot of the students will form themselves into different groups. You will have those who play football, those who can you believe they go and do ice skating between 12:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning once a week. So that's the student ice hockey is in the middle of the night. Anyway, that's one community. This is our college choir, and we bring in quite a few from other colleges that don't have chapels, and they can sing in our choir on a Monday night, and we eat together every Monday and go on trips and things. So there are little ways of building communities of friendship and purpose within Christchurch. But one of the things that we don't have, and one of the things that I started when I very first arrived at Christchurch, is that none of the students have their own kitchens. A few in second year do, but pretty much they're all in catered accommodation with kitchen points with a kettle and maybe a toaster. They miss baking, their own kitchens, home environment, being in a sitting room area where you can talk. So one of the core things that I do is every single Thursday between 4 and 5, every Thursday between 4 and 5, I have a thing called brain strain tea and cake. It seems a really simple thing, but this is actually the core to my building community at Christchurch, is brain strain tea and cake every Thursday, and there's no agenda, nothing is expected of young people. There's no talk, there's nothing laid on, except there is always homemade cake and loads of tea, and we get about 30 to 40. I have a big study, which is a great blessing. So 30 to 40 young people will come each week, different people, and it's a way for them to meet each other, to, if they're isolated, if they're lonely, to have that space where they can just be. And I feel that part of my role in that is just to be a human being that doesn't expect anything more from them than they just turn up and be themselves. I don't care what their grades are, I don't care about their essay, I just connect with them in that space. So that's every Thursday, and then I found I'm not a great baker, and so I set this up and then found that they all love Bake Off. They're the Bake Off generation, these students, and they miss their kitchens. And so then they're like, can we come and bake? So they come to my house. They come to my house, and I've got a 12-year-old, Daniel, and he likes bossing them about and puts them into teams and bakes with them. And so I can book in 4 a week, and they come over on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and I just make tea, and then they bake stuff. So yesterday I had 4, and they made Rocky Road, and some of these guys have left now. That was last year. So forming community sometimes is around the simple stuff, like sharing tea, eating cake, just having that space to talk with one another. And I think if I hadn't got this, I don't know how I would get to know a lot of the young people unless there was a problem. I'd only ever see the ones when there was a big problem. But this way I get to meet them when there isn't a problem. And I also don't get to just meet the ones who might come to church, because it's not just about the ones who come on a Sunday morning. And so it gives me the opportunity to actually get to know the wider community. This is a picture of the other thing that I wanted to do is to try and form communities between the different groups. So to think of what are the ways that we can bring together the staff with the canons, with the students. And it seems to me that one of the ways to do that is to do something that's looking out, that's about something outside of ourselves. Going back to what Jean Vanier says about communities that look out. If we're just talking about our own work and our own, we have a few ways of connecting, but actually we can connect when reaching out beyond ourselves. So for the last 2 years, we've had various things that are looking out, that do connect the different groups. This is the Advent Sleepover. So once a year in Advent, a group of us, and it is canons, staff, students, sleep out in the cathedral for the Church Urban Fund. And this is us all dressed in nativity costumes. You will see there a sub-dean of the cathedral dressed as a donkey. Because you don't publish this, you might not be very good. There's the archdeacon. They're all there dressed up. And it gives us a way of connecting, but it also gives us a story to tell. So even a year after, staff will say, yeah, when we went to the cathedral, I had this conversation the other day, I went to morning prayer in a sheep onesie and there were tourists there and they didn't know what was going on. And there is this common story that you can then tell that then brings us together and gives us a sense of belonging to this place. And so the Advent Sleepover, we're doing it again in December. It's okay, it's not that cold actually, but the problem with sleeping in the cathedral is they've got the blower heaters, and so the dust is all up at the top, and then they go off for 3 hours in the middle of the night, and basically dust settles over us, so we're like the Pompeii, dust-shrouded people by the morning. But that's one way of doing that. We also, last year, took a trip. I took a group of students and we went to Calais and went and helped with the refugee camp there in the jungle. And that's my group who went there. But the staff collected blankets and things for us to take. They went, a lot of them went for 2 weeks. I did, I think 3 days, but that was enough. They were very lovely, but they're spending that much time in a little B&B with them all. They were brilliant. But we went and worked in the Calais jungle just a month before it was then closed. But doing that for just 2 weeks, that has rumbled on and it has created a common story thread. So we've just been collecting socks to send out. So they will remember, oh, we did this, and that was important, and can we help in any other way? And it creates something that's outside of ourselves and creates those connections that are outside. I've got to just keep talking, and then hopefully we'll ask questions. I've got one other thing. Just wanted to say something, and then hopefully you might have some questions for me, about the Christian community at Christ Church. Many of the other colleges will have one service a week that most people will come to on a Sunday evensong in the evening. A lot of the colleges have that. Because our chapel is the cathedral, everything is shared in a sense. We don't have our own space. So a lot of what we do is either early in the morning or late at night. So we'll have college communion at 8:45 a.m. for the really faithful and keen, and then Compline later at night, and then quite a number come to evensong on Sunday. But our community, Christian community, is a bit more scattered, and I've come to realise that that's fine. We can't kind of bring together what won't come together, but there is a core, and I think the model of Jesus' ministry of bringing together a core that then will go out and be the salt and light and leaven. We have a core chapel group who do meet and pray together, and I do invest a bit more time in them, because I can't invest time in everybody. But there is a core chapel group who do come to things, and this is us at Hillfield Friary that we go to on chapel retreat, and that's Hillfield, which is this wonderful Franciscan place. I don't know if you've been, but down in Dorset. And so we had a wonderful week where they worked and lived with the friars and ate together, and it created a deeper prayerful community that I hope and pray will then have an impact into the whole. But it all goes back to that same thing, that community is less important than the people within the community. And the quote I'll end with is, "The person who loves their dream of community will destroy community, but the person who loves those around them will create community." And I think that's the heart of it, is about loving people around us, about being open and including those who are excluded, loving one another. And it's not really about building this wonderful community at all. It's about loving each other, and the hope and prayer is that from that community will build, and people will be more loving to one another as well. I'm going to stop now, but hopefully we've got some time. We've got like a bit of time for questions and more chat. That's a final one. I forgot that one. We went on Sunday, last Sunday. It's Fried's week, so we went on pilgrimage to Binsey on Sunday, and so we went in the rain to and the church, the Perch. It's such a great sign. We went to the Perch and then on to the church, and all sorts of people came. It wasn't just the chapel faithful. Actually, quite a few, because it was they loved the idea of going on a pilgrimage and going on a walk and getting out of the city. And so there was a wonderful moment where we stood around Fried's well in the pouring rain with hymn books being sprinkled with water by the vicar there. And I think it was a funny moment. But there we go. I'll put it back to the upside down image of Christ Church. I don't know if you can see that. The picture is taken in the Mercury, in the pond by Mercury, and so it's upside down. Just to give that idea that can kind of look at things differently, I think. That's what makes me members.
Thank you very much, Claire. It sounds as if you're doing an extraordinary job with a disparate groups of people.
Thank you. It's fun.
I have the microphone. If you